Good evening and welcome to this special Board of Supervisors meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 31st. And on the agenda tonight, we are going to be discussing some of the options for the sewer proceeds. But before we start, if everybody could please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you much. We'll do a quick roll call. Supervisor Weiss.
Here.
Supervisor Blundy.
Here.
Supervisor Grenier.
Here.
And Supervisor Lewis.
Here.
All five supervisors are present for this meeting. So before we move,
it was earlier. So,
what's that?
John was just asking about the video feed from the meeting room, but it is on, I believe, even though it's not showing up on the.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just not on the monitor here. Okay.
Unless you want to see yourself.
That's
No.
fine.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda, number 4, is discussion and consideration of funding a Patterson Farm master plan. I know we all sat through an extensive presentation by the ad hoc committee regarding the Patterson Farm, the various options for the buildings. It was kind of a broad level of what our next move would be towards that. So I just want to open it up to discussion. Any supervisors? Kurt, if you want to give any feedback as far as, things that you've discussed or things that have been brought before you. And I'll open it with Dan. It looks like you have a question.
More process question first for maybe Kurt and or Dave, I guess, and really anything we talk about tonight, right? So we have proceeds sitting out there, obviously. This one specific item that's on the agenda relative to a potential project, or what I'll call a project, is Patterson Farm. Just say we pick any specific projects or any whatever to fund in some way, shape, or form, whether it's we assign a number now or just say, yeah, we'd like to fund that at some point. If we were to assign a dollar value tonight to anything, is that something that we could execute immediately? Or is that something that we would have to bring it through the budget process for the 2023 budget? That's the Kurt. So I just want to make sure we set that first.
Sure. I believe in, and I'll make sure that Kurt reiterates this. I do believe that because it is a proceed, that it does not have to be a budget item. But Kurt, you can give clarification on that.
You answered it.
Perfect.
So we could spend it tomorrow if we wanted to.
Yeah, in the end, right. So in the end, when we're dealing with that, Dan, or like rescue plan money or anything of that sort, it's like we had that presentation on putting that project together for the stormwater project in Mapleville. That wasn't in the budget, but that would be coming essentially from rescue plan money. So it falls under that same category that James just described.
I would add that if indeed, it depends on how you decide to authorize the spending. If you want to go through a resolution, you have to have a resolution created, which would have to be at the next meeting. Well, I can't do it tomorrow night because that agenda is already out. It could be at the special meeting next week. Or if an ordinance, you could do the same thing. If you're not going to do either one, or if you're going to do a policy, you want to have that at least on an agenda. If you're just going to make a vote and designate money, then yeah, you could do that tonight, if in theory.
James, so
yes, sir.
All I have to offer on number 4 here is a recent conversation with Dennis Stedman, who we all know. We had talked after he saw the agenda. Obviously, beyond just a master plan, if the board wants to proceed with that, he wanted me to emphasize to all of you then, these are the words I'll use. He uses a different name, but that part of that master plan would be the creation of like a steering committee that would have members on it that would assist with the RFP. That would be the committee that any consultant would work with, probably have a board liaison or 2 on that committee as well, that he just wanted to reiterate in the end that was essentially the 1 and 1A part of the recommendation was the plan, and then a committee to assist with creating that plan and delivering the report to the board.
Okay, thanks, Kurt. So I'll open it up to any supervisor comments, any questions, kind of framework. I mean, now knowing that, what Kurt just said about, a steering committee or almost I guess it would be a graduation of that ad hoc committee, whether it's not the same members of that ad hoc committee, how we transition that committee into a steering committee to figure out exactly how to come up with a master plan for Patterson Farm. Is there any feedback on that?
James, all I would add is that the board doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the committee tonight, but it would just recognize if you decided to do something, that should probably be a discussion that maybe you involve Dennis in and that you look to have on the agenda on the 15th, as far as how you want to proceed with that, making those determinations.
Fair enough. Yes, Dan.
First of all, just for anyone who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend anyone check out that presentation by the ad hoc committee. It was well done. I think, I'm very interested in a steering committee. I'm very interested in implementing their recommendations, which also lead to future plans, right? But in order to, maybe I'm leaning towards, because what I do for work is a lot of early stage due diligence work to set up to actually execute some plan. But I think based on the information we have to date on the buildings, on the grounds, on some other information, I think it's very important that we address the existing conditions of the lead in the soils, some of the other remediation issues, health and safety issues surrounding the actual buildings. And I'm not saying rebuild the buildings in any specific way at this point, just the basic concepts of having to clean up the soils within the first 20 feet or so of the buildings, so that we can the Historic Commission has requested that we are looking at potentially getting Patterson Farm buildings on the Historic Register. There's an active application going on right now. And with that, there's some other items that would have to come into play for any future plans. So this is almost a phase 0 versus a phase 1 when we talk about planning phases, in that we go ahead and evaluate what we've already done, right? We've had some building assessments. I'm not sure we have all of them done yet that RV's done over the last few years. We've had some soil assessments done. I'm not sure we've done all of them, but we've done a fair amount surrounding the buildings with respect to lead paint. We're doing some what I'll call historic resources evaluations. That dendrochronology thing that we talked about at some point was brought up. And I think Mr. Majewski and some of the Historic Commission folks have met with that individual that could perform that study at Patterson Farm recently. So in my mind, even before we get to that point where we establish a committee for a steering committee to set up that plan, just so we understand what we have to deal with, and we have a lot of it done, and we can get the buildings and the grounds ready for that plan. I would first recommend that we figure out how much it's going to cost to remediate the soils, to clean up some other stuff, and just do the basics so that we can then move forward with a plan. I think we could execute that immediately, so we don't hold up and we can plan in a parallel process, but we can get it done sooner rather than later if the board's willing.
Yes, Kurt.
Just from the staff perspective, to pick up on what Dan said, I think he makes an excellent point. And I think what the committee had talked about all along was that remediation, the environmental issues would obviously going to be part of any project that in the end, in the interest of, and I will mimic Dennis Stedman's words, his desire of having a certain level of momentum and community interest in this. I would just suggest, having spoken to Jim and Dennis and these guys, that you all could sit, if you were inclined, right, to want to show the community you want to move ahead on the study, that you could do that without you're not committing dollars literally. I mean, you could earmark a certain amount of money. In the meantime, start to work on the things that Dan talked about that could come back to a subsequent meeting with cost estimates, and to allow you all to know what you're dealing with, because that was drawn into their conclusions. And it would just be moving up that part of the project, probably properly so, especially on the environmental, the lead-based paint that you all are aware of up front. And we could ask the firm that put that original assessment together that Remington Vernick engaged for updated costs, full remediation, at least on those parts of it to get those costs. I'm sure you're going to be having several of these meetings, James, including in 8 or 9 days, that we could work to get additional things for consideration to wrap this up, sort of to keep the momentum going, but to get all of these things properly placed in terms of having them done.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything?
James, the only thing I'll add one more around cost. Kurt, correct me if I'm wrong on this, because it's been a while since I've read it, but I think the remediation costs were estimated at about 180,000. That's the number I have in my head.
That's what it was 4.5 years ago.
Okay. So just so the board has some idea of what that would be from a.
So probably 300 now in today's, you know what I mean? So
let's hope not, but yeah, it definitely.
No, but I mean, in the end,
yeah.
you know, it's going to be more. And
yeah.
Yeah.
But and can you just clarify the remediation surrounded which building primarily?
Satterthwaite.
Okay.
But there was additional lead-based paint that was detected in other properties as well. There was scraping and things that had gone on that they had determined there was not nearly the presence of Satterthwaite, but there was other lead-based paint and soil surrounding other properties as well.
Generally, James, it was the first 20 feet around most of the buildings that had been painted up to maybe a foot deep, I think was what the conclusion was.
And just refresh me on, and I'm looking at it now because I haven't looked at this in a while. Where was Satterthwaite as far as ranking in the presentation?
In terms of lead-based paint?
No, in terms of
What to do first, you mean?
Yeah,
In terms of buildings to address first?
Yeah, where was that?
I'm not sure we got I mean, it's obviously important. I mean, I don't want to undersell its importance, but I'm not sure we got, my recollection, and Fred, you were part of this committee, so please correct me here, was that there was an importance for moving ahead with Satterthwaite, but I think it was more of a recommendation to really start to plan for what the end use for Satterthwaite would be, so that then we could come up with a plan for I'm gonna oversimplify this, but fix it to meet that final use. I'm not sure that they put it as number 1 or number 5, for example.
But James, I will say this, back to Dan's original point, regardless of what any of those uses are, how advanced, whatever it is, the cleanup is a given in any scenario that a plan comes up with. It's going to have to be.
So regardless what the future of that building is, it doesn't
got to
matter.
be cleaned up. Yeah, they got to be cleaned up.
Okay.
So, but I mean, again, I'll say this, we could move if the board was inclined to do something with this motion. And let me just put this in context since Dan brought that other number up. Essentially, having spoken with Dennis, who's tinkered around a bit with this and talking with the committee, my guess is that on a master plan to this scope, you'd want to earmark, let's say $250,000. You're talking of not just a traditional study, you're talking of reuse, historic possibilities, some market analysis. So 250 would probably be the amount that you'd want to earmark. And again, in the meantime, you still could then sit and move on the other things to especially address Dennis's concern. I'm sure I've heard from him a few times. I know he's called you, James. I think his desire is that this just doesn't sit and, lay dormant for a while and people lose interest. So.
No, and I think that's what the importance of putting it in tonight's meeting is that, just to show the public that this board definitely has intention to move forward with this under some, at some point, sooner than later, if it was up to me, I think that's the intent of the board. I mean, the other members can speak as well.
And James, just adding, and I'm adding to what Kurt just said about the cost. I might even bump it up to 300, but that would cover the remediation. I think that would cover the application to get to the National Register to get the farm listed, and that would likely cover the dendrochronology testing, which was not a high budget number, but it would add to the first. So those are the big 3, I think. And then once you get it listed and you become part of certain National Register listings and list other things, then you can apply for certain grants and other monies that don't always have to come out of the township's pocketbook. It can come out of other state and federal grants as well, which would always, that's always nice if we have the opportunity.
Excellent. Any other board feedback?
I think it makes sense to go with the 300 because that doesn't mean we have to spend the 300, but that way it gives us, the ability as we learn more information to make sure we can move forward. I'm 100% behind the concept that I want to make it clear to people that, it's our desire to move forward and hopefully that's where we'll land. But I don't want to, I don't want to lose momentum.
Yeah, and
Yes.
our consideration of accepting or earmarking funds for creating this master plan for the farm in no way inhibits other groups from independently moving forward on other things such as establishing historical significance for the properties, how old each house is. That'll be part of it, but it's really more icing on the cake so we can get more money down the road and certification. But as far as creating a master plan, I think that's the first step in this process. Well, actually, the second step, the first plan was forming the ad hoc committee, getting a real feel of what's going on. And now we go create the master plan, and then we can determine if we want to go through with the phase 1 study, which was also recommended by the ad hoc committee, which will cost us up to $1 million. So, we got to start somewhere. And I think this is a great place to start.
So for the record, your phase 3 is Dan's phase 0, so we can make sure we're talking on the same.
I want to start at the very beginning because it's a very fun place to start.
I agree.
There's
Sister.
a reference there that I didn't quite get, but
There's a song. I'm trying to think of it.
No, right, me.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you.
Supervisor Lewis, did you want to add anything?
Is there a formal motion on this?
I don't believe there is, no.
Not at this point.
There's my question to you, James, because we're having 2 meetings. And I'm not sure who else. I'm sure there's some people traveling this week because of the holiday yesterday. And I know there's obviously interest in this one. Is this something that we might, I'm all for getting started right away, don't get me wrong, but is this something that we want to maybe hold off till the next meeting and make the motion just in case we have a couple of groups that want to chime in? I could go either way. I'm just throwing it out
I mean,
there.
if a group wants to chime in and say, wish you hadn't done that, then I guess we could revisit it next time. But I'm imagining that.
If I could, I'm sorry, I was going to chime in to say to do, if you want to do the steering committee, which is obviously something, I think a direction everybody's going to agree to go in. You have to think about how many members you want.
But that's
Do you
not
want,
tonight.
do you want particular?
We're not there. Dave. We're not there. Today we're.
All right, well, that's why I'm asking, because it sounded like there was a desire to make a motion, which is great. But some of the elements of that would include probably the number. Do you want particular backgrounds and professions to be part of that? Again, I'm just throwing that stuff out there because if we're going to be drafting that, we want to make sure we.
I think the only thing that we need to consider today is if we want to go and approve the establishment of the master plan for the farm. And then the bones, we can, forming an oversight committee is recommended by the ad hoc committee. And going forward after that, I think that could be done at a subsequent meeting. But I think the only thing that we have on the agenda, James, you can correct me, is deliberation and consideration of accepting master, forming the master plan, and maybe earmarking X number of dollars to do so.
Yeah, I think the motion that I would be looking for would be exactly that. Funding a Patterson master plan and how much?
Okay, well then I'll tell you what. How about if I make the motion?
Hold on a second.
Mr.
John is
Hand
still
up
raising his hand. Go ahead.
Well, you can amend the motion, but
Uh-huh.
I
Go ahead.
Do it not to
I mean, just
exceed.
for argument's sake, so we can actually argue the point. I would say I make a motion to fund a master plan study for Satisway Farm and the homestead, not to exceed $300,000.
Do I hear a second? Mr. Lewis?
Okay, am I recognized? I would
Absolutely.
be comfortable seconding the motion. I would, however, suggest that before there's a formation of another committee, we haven't formally discharged the ad hoc committee, right? The participants of that committee could continue providing oversight in this, correct?
Absolutely.
So in order to speed the process, right, would there be a reason why we couldn't continue with the ad hoc property committee to address? Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
But
Point of order.
I'm not, so having,
I didn't quite,
Point of order. So much fun to use these rules. Fred, did you say the Patterson Farm Master Plan in your motion?
yes,
Patterson Farm Master Plan,
you.
including the Satisway, the Hempstead,
Thank you.
not to
Sure,
exceed
yes.
$300,000.
Kurt, did you want to add something?
no, I did. You know, I've
I
spoken,
don't think I
I think
yielded,
you've
but-
even, I think several of you have asked me if Dennis would be interested in continuing. So having spoken to Dennis briefly, but not about that, you certainly could ask the committee to continue. I don't know the committee to its interest. They very well may be, you know, but I mean, subsequent to this motion, if it passes, if the board is so inclined, we could make inquiries to the committee as a group, their interest in serving as in this capacity. And if any of them suggest that they can't, we would come back to those numbers with the board as far as if we continued, I think it was up to a certain number board, if you want to look for new members, or maybe they all want to keep going.
To Supervisor Lewis's point, the committee still exists because you haven't dissolved it yet. It's an ad hoc committee. So, I mean, it would continue in that, whatever capacity you want to ask them to do that.
with that, could it be made more general than that, that the funding plan covers the results of the work of the ad hoc property committee? Obviously, most of that will be spent on Patterson Farms, but it's possible that there may be minor stuff with other properties as well. That way, we're not precluding them from continuing the work that they've done so far. Supervisor Weiss, would that be something you'd be willing to consider?
I'm sorry, Supervisor Lewis, would you repeat that?
Yeah, I was suggesting that rather than referring to it as a Patterson Farm master plan, but an ad hoc property committee master plan. That way it's tied to the committee. It continues. Virtually everybody who's listening would know that virtually all the money would go toward properties on Patterson Farm. But the premise is we're using the same committee, the same process. It allows us to move faster.
I wouldn't agree to that because the only other property that's not identified on Patterson Farm would be the Slack House at the golf course. And that is, I hesitate to expand past the farm for this one issue. Because, you know, I personally need to get some feedback more from Spirit, see if they want to partner with us or some other organization to partner with us on the Slack House. And we kind of know what the Slack House is going to end up being.
Yeah.
But you know, the request from the ad hoc committee was the farm master plan. So I'm going to stick with what the recommendations of the committee is, and you know, we can always address other properties at a future, you know, for future consideration. But right now, you know, because of the recommendations of the ad hoc committee, I think I want to limit it to the farm.
And again, my intent isn't to initiate the Slack House, which is actually in a relatively stable manner, but just more to keep with the committee and their work. So as long as it's viewed as part of the ad hoc committee and if
They continue to do that work, sure.
and if we're saying that the funds would be only used on Patterson Farm, that's fine by me. I just don't want to have a situation where we're, you know, where they need to do something somewhere else, or that's small, or that we're missing something. I just want to give them the flexibility they deserve, but that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be a problem with the, I mean, I don't even know if we should continue with the, if we're talking about amending the motion, I guess this is worth
But if I'm
considering.
not, if you're not, I'm okay with it. If you're okay with, we'll just move to call the question.
Well, we'll have a second first. Do you
No,
want?
I made the second.
You made the second.
Supervisor
Okay.
Lewis
He made the
seconded.
second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So then, you know, I think the ad hoc committee, since its task was all the properties, you know, if we can direct it to right now, concentrate on the farm, I don't think we'd be violating the charter of the ad hoc committee. So I think we could, you know, call it at that.
Supervisor Weiss, can I ask you a clarification question on your motion, just to make, in your sorry for air quotes, but the plan, I hate doing them, but that's all I can think of right now. When we're talking about the $300,000, when you think of what the plan includes, is that inclusive of the soil remediation of the lead paint, the dendrochronology, and the supporting the application for the National Register for the property?
No.
That's where I came up with the 300,000. I just wanted to see if we're talking about that or some other thing that totals 300,000. That's my clarification question.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, this is just for the study. So, but we could get the actual costs involved, of remediation that if we have extra money, we can use that $300,000. If we don't, we'll have to earmark more funds for it. That's, to me, is not, I mean, if the master plan includes the actual remediation of the lead on the farm, that's something we can,
Yeah. So in your mind, it's a little more of it's a separate, if I wanted to make a separate motion to be specific to that, we could talk about that separately, or more about the overall grand plan, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I asked. I want to make sure.
Yes, Kurt.
So to go back to Dan's point, though, in the end, we would start with those costs, particularly the remediation. I'm only thinking of the cleanup issues. I know Dan's talking about the application as well. And to me, if they came back with a remediation of a certain amount of money, that clearly the remediation and the master plan could not be done. I mean, then we're going to have to talk about that's going to be the first thing. If we come back that the remediation is $175,000, then clearly 300 is not going to be enough to do both of those items. But I still think in the end, that's can just be another motion to supplement this one, to have enough then for the hiring of whatever that firm is. We don't know what their costs are. That's an estimate. So I still think it can address Dan's concern.
Well, James, if you're okay with it, I can make that motion after we address this one. I'm okay with the motion that Supervisor Weiss made. I just want to make another motion after this to address the other items, so we can push forward with that.
Yeah, I'm not. I think we should probably get it all under one motion. Like, come together with what we want that motion to say, or do we want it as two separate motions? I'm trying to figure out. So specifically, Dan, what you're looking for is whether or not there's going to be a study, the time study. Is that what you're looking for?
No. So we've already done. I'll be brief. We've already done a study to understand that there's lead contaminated soils at the farm. And we got an estimate a few years back, which has probably gone up, to Kurt's point, about what it'll take to remediate that. And then sort of ancillary, but also included in items that I would like to see go forward pretty quickly because it opens us up for more funding, would be the dendrochronology item, which I think was a $5,000 or $6,000 item. Excuse me. And then support the National Register listing application, which is probably in a similar cost level as the dendrochronology, maybe a hair more, and that wrap that up in a fund in maybe a motion not to exceed. Like, again, that's where I came up with the 300K to a not to exceed, but it would be directing our township manager and staff to reach out to a firm that could get a proposal to conduct the remediation activities and initiate the other items. So it's a little bit different from what what Fred's been talking about.
Yeah, and I think that we're all on board. Just one second, Kurt. I think we're all on board as far as the remediation piece of it. I think that we all clearly understand that that's kind of something that needs to be done. The National Registry, how exactly, I mean, have we gone down that road already?
Yeah, so, and I can give you a very brief summary. So several years ago, members of the Historic Commission started that process and never was finished. They're currently most of this is being done almost pro bono by our Historical Commission because we have folks that can do it. So they're going down that road now to apply, and Mr. Majewski's been supporting it, I believe. He can correct me if I misspoke there, but they're going down that road now to fill out the paperwork to get to finalize the application to the National Register.
Okay.
Idea of the cost.
So, Fred, if I could before.
Sure, go ahead. No, I was going to ask Kurt first. He had it next. What were you going to say, Kurt? I'm sorry.
No, the only thing I was going to say in the end is I don't think that that's a real expensive
No, it's not.
proposition, Dan, right? So, I mean, in the end, the number that's going to affect the overall aggregate number is the cleanup, right? I mean, that's the other items are more, I would say, marginal in cost into the few thousands of dollars, correct? Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So,
Matt or Suzanne, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You lit up.
thank you. All things being equal, I would prefer that we, do the master plan, get moving on the master plan, and then start taking the next steps, because obviously the soil has to be cleaned, but if the soil's cleaned and then there's additional work done, then we've just messied the soil again. I don't want to, I want to go about this as logically as we can, and I don't want to commit to things until I have a better understanding of where we're heading. I understand that some of the costs may appear de minimis, but, I thought that was the whole point. When I read the work by the ad hoc committee, when I watched the presentation, I call it step 0, 1, or 2. I thought the first step was to get more details as to where we might go ultimately. And to do the work to get us there, but not to start deciding where we're going before we have that overall master plan that really articulates where we might go.
So do you think that and I'll get to you in a sec, Fred, do you think that the motion is essentially saying to the residents, to the ad hoc committee, to everybody involved, to the, historic commission, the township is now taking this matter serious? We're earmarking $300,000 and we're saying that we're going to start a master plan on how we're moving towards what we're doing with Patterson Farm. Do you think that it's still kind of a big picture type motion? It's not specifics of how we're going to start spending that money?
Yeah, that's I want to say that's how I voted, but I know we haven't voted yet. But that's what I would have seconded if John hadn't beat me to it. Right, that's what I thought we were talking about. And again, I based on the ad hoc report and all those presentations and stuff. So
One of the things that if we leave the actual cost of remediation out of the motion is that, and I'm only speaking this from a 5,000 foot level, we don't know what will be remediating. I mean, there's a chance, and I'm being hypothetical here, so nobody in the community, get the tar and feathers, but there's a possibility that the farmhouse, the Southwaite home, might not be salvageable. So the cost of remediation, if we remove the building and only deal with the land and any collateral, remediation from removing the building, will be different than restoring the building and the land. So the plan comes first, and then we figure out how much money it's going to cost us to remediate. I think, process-wise, the logical step would be to approve the master plan, earmarking the funds, and then earmarking whatever we need to actually pay for the remediation, depending on what the plan will tell us to do. That's my thought process.
That makes sense.
It's just a matter of when we're going to spend the money, and that's how I feel about it. So,
Okay. Any other feedback before I take a vote?
Chairman McCarthy, do you want to
Yes.
speak on this issue? There is one resident, I believe, in the audience. Did you want to speak on this issue of this one? Okay, so there is somebody in the meeting room who wants to speak on this. So I want to make sure that gentleman gets an opportunity to speak. So,
Absolutely.
sir, if you could go to the podium, to the
Thanks,
microphone, identify yourself.
I don't know if the supervisors were done yet.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I thought you were.
Did you have something else to add? That's okay.
I do think it's whether we earmark funds or not for this particular item. I do think it's important that we direct the township, staff to either reach out to basically develop an RFP or some process for getting cost estimates for doing the remediation. When I say remediation, I'm specific to the soils that we know are contaminated with lead. I'm not talking about remediation of the buildings, which is a totally different process. And I would like to earmark a few dollars for the for the National Register and dendrochronology thing, because that I do think can actually pay big dividends for us moving forward. But again, that can either be included in this motion to allow township manager to do that, so we can get information for future earmarks, or we could do it now, because I think that's something that needs to be done no matter what we do, because one, it's an environmental issue. We know about it. There's some, I don't want to use the word liability, but there's something along those lines because we know it's there. And from a health and safety perspective, as soon as we want to start doing anything at the buildings, we have to provide for anyone's health and safety, whether it's our staff or some contractor, because that's a known hazard out there. And that's not something that stops us from implementing any plans or developing any plans. It can totally a parallel path thing. So I don't know, Fred, if you want to keep it separate, that's fine, and I can make a motion after this.
Well, I think we can include the master plan to include an RFP for remediation of the land and or the building. I don't think the RFP will cost that much different for those parameters. So I think the scope, widening the scope for that is within my motion without changing it.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yes, Kurt.
Sorry. And just to go back to Dan's point, right, in the end, if we work through Remington Vernick to put that together, what have you, we'd be bringing that back to the board regardless. So your point taken with the amount, but in the end, we're going to have to come back. And if we have to allocate something else, then it would have to be under another motion anyways at that point in time. Because my guess is it'll have to be. So
as the seconder, before I would agree to the perceived change, I want to get a ruling from the solicitor as to what you view as included and excluded in the purview for the ad hoc.
Here's what I understand. The consideration of funding a Patterson Farm master plan in an amount not to exceed $300,000, which includes the funding of an RFP for remediation of the soils and or the Satterthwaite House at the Patterson Farm location, as well as I understand, investigating dendrochronology and historic registry actions for purposes of the property as well. Am I correct in that?
No, you are not.
Okay. What is incorrect? And I want to make sure are the last two items not included in that?
Correct.
Okay, that was the place where I was going to think where I may have. So it's just the first part where the RFP would include, the motion not to exceed $300,000 would include the RFP for remediation purposes. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
With that, I mean, my first approach was to give the ad hoc property committee more leeway. I'm not sure where gosh.
I mean, they may come back with more recommendations that the board will obviously consider at some point after that. I think that's what else I've heard from everybody discussing it today.
With Supervisor Blendy's concerned, is that a prohibition for them to do that then?
No, I think if they come back and recommend, that a parallel path for dendrochronology and the historic registry approach and request out of the board can then say at some point, if they decide they agree with that, to pursue it at that time.
I mean, Dan said he was going to make a separate motion, so that's,
Right.
I'm literally just being a stickler to what's been discussed.
That's all right. So make sure
But-
we want to be, I think, to.
Yeah,
Supervisor
but I
Lewis's
think
point.
that's the way to handle it.
Okay. So right now, we're limiting it to the funding not to exceed $300,000 to include an RFP for remediation of the land and or the building at the Satterthwaite House at the Patterson Farm property.
Do you, Supervisor Lewis, do you amend your second with that?
Well, you're asking me if I'm I suppose, I mean, I would have been fine with it all at once, but I mean, in deference to members, I want to be agreeable. I wouldn't delay a vote then. Wouldn't be my preferred, but I'll accept.
Thank you. I believe we've heard from the supervisors. There's somebody in the audience that would like to speak on this.
Yes, he's approaching the microphone now. So, Joe, sir, if you We get up there, hopefully the mic's working. Just identify yourself by name and your address, and then feel free to speak.
Joe Camarata, 1908 Westover Road. I'm also Chair of the Historical Commission. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for including this topic on the agenda this evening. This is actually a very important topic. The Historical Commission has reviewed the report from the ad hoc committee and strongly supports the development of a master plan for Patterson Farm. But I think as this discussion has shown, I think we need to be very clear in what we want in that master plan and what we want to come out of it. And our understanding of the master plan is actually one which will provide us alternatives for adaptive reuse of the buildings on Patterson Farm. And once we have those alternatives, we can actually make some decisions around not just remediation, but also the costs that are involved. And in general, in dealing with historic buildings, there's 4 treatment types. There's preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. And they all have completely different targets and costs associated with them. So I do believe that what's very important is that we first have agreement from the board in terms of how we want to use those buildings. And then once we have that, we can go off and get the appropriate cost estimates. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Any other audience?
Nope, there's a member of the media here. I don't think he's interested in approaching the microphone, so. Other than that, not here, now maybe online.
Anybody on the phone that would like to add any public comment?
Let's give him all the respect. He's a member of the press, right? He's not a member of the media. He's a member of the press.
I was including press as a subset of the media because I know that he also is on social media too, so I didn't want to limit that.
Okay, good point.
Anybody on the line?
Yes, we have one caller on the line. I'm going to bring Dennis in the room now.
Thank you.
Oh, his ears must be burning.
Dennis, could you say your name and address for the record, please?
Dennis Stedman, 10 Milton Drive, Lower Makefield. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I would like to just.
Wait a minute. What is that?
Dennis, hold on 1 second. There was some crazy music playing. Are you there now?
All right. People are getting home from work and they like to play their phones as they walk around the house. My apologies.
Sorry. Dennis is smooth like butter. So that's
okay.
Dennis, sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you. I would, first of all, thanks for putting this on the agenda because it is the first, the first chronological priority and the first priority for the Patterson Farm as the chairman of the ad hoc committee is to develop a master plan. Everything kind of waits for that or is dependent upon that. I agree with what Joe Camarata said from the Historical Commission. I think that having alternative uses for these buildings, potential alternative uses, will be very important.
Caller 4696. What are you calling it about?
Sorry, you're still on.
Can you hear me?
Master plan discussion.
Dennis is still on?
Yeah, Dennis, you're good. I was just muting the other person. Sorry.
So I just want to say to the Board of Supervisors, I really appreciate and fully support your moving forward with the master plan. It is a critical first step, and this is how you can assure that the township money is best spent, is to take a measurement first, develop a plan. The carpenter adage of measure twice, cut once. Let's do a professional plan, and then we can decide the micro spending that'll be required to maximize the value to the community. It's a tremendous asset to this community. So I think after 24 or 5 years, a sound master plan is well called for. So I appreciate your motions and support of that.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think I can speak on behalf of all the supervisors. We appreciate your hard work during this process. You've been pivotal and a great asset, and hopefully we can keep you around for some further steering, I could say.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Take care, Dennis. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
You are smooth like butter, Dennis.
Is there somebody else on the line? I believe somebody else was coming in.
Yes, we do. We have Laura on the line. I'll bring her in now.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure I mute this time.
Thank you. Hi, Laura. Can you say your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, Laura Tarantino, 185 Durham Road, Newtown.
And your comment, please?
It's regarding this development of the master plan, and I just keep feeling as though what gets lost in the sauce is something that actually came to light at the end of April when Pennsylvania brought up to the rights for development rights for 40 farms in 19 counties across the state. So they put in $9.7 million to make sure that these farms stay green spaces. And part of that is this, something that was mentioned at the last Board of Supervisors meeting about an agricultural security area, which is, I believe, I looked it up online, it is a unit of 250 or more acres of land used for agricultural production of crops and or livestock. So that component, to keep that true, means that one has to use that as a tool for protecting farms from non-agricultural uses. So when we talk about finding alternative uses for these buildings, it keeps, to me, lost that we're talking about a farm, and these buildings had a purpose for the farm. The barn had a purpose for the farm. So before we jump to finding other uses for it that are non-agricultural related, the priority should be to keep that as the focus. And I just feel it was lost the other day when they were talking about fundraising options, and the Yardley group wanted to use the picture taking session. And I thought to myself, there's something's wrong here, because you're trying to keep the farm as a farm, and you have somebody else ready to go in and redo the farm to extend the arts program. It just keeps snowballing. I'm grateful that there is a focus now to come with a master plan, but for all these years that nothing has been done, please be kind in terms of the consideration. I mean, it seems to me that there's no place for Patterson Farm Preservation, the group, as a nonprofit who's been touting saving this parcel of land. And we give more credence to an arts group who's been a tenant on the land. There's a shift here. There's something wrong with this picture. And I just really hope that everyone will give it the time it deserves to look at the land and the buildings and how they can be adapted for agricultural related uses and not jump to something else. So I really am happy to see this moving forward, and it is something from a community perspective we've been watching for years. So I will be paying attention, and I want to know that there's fairness in this, the view of the bigger picture. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. I believe that we have Supervisor Grenier and Task Manager Ferguson that want to add to that point. So.
Yeah, just in response, just so not just Laura, but whoever's watching who may have a concern that we're trying to change uses of the farm or might be considering changing of uses. First and foremost, this is a farm. We have over 200 acres in an agricultural conservation easement. And Mr. Trulove, our solicitor, can say whatever he wants in addition to what I'm about to, but that means when we're in an agricultural conservation easement, the land that's under easement, which is the active farmland, will always be active farmland. We cannot change it at all, even if we wanted to. That was forethought to make sure that it stays a farm, always and forever in perpetuity. That's a number one priority. This, some of us may have differing opinions on the final uses of things, and that'll come out of this planning process. But first and foremost, this is a farm. We do not want to impede the use of the land as a farm. It's a huge asset to the township on multiple levels, and I don't think anyone is trying to do that. When it comes to the buildings are not within an agricultural easement per se. That's not how the agricultural easements are written. But to your point, anything we do with the buildings, we don't want to hinder the farmer in any way from actively farming the land. There may be some buildings that are best used after we go through this whole process as what I'll call farming uses, agricultural uses, storage of equipment, storage of materials, whatever it may be. There's probably some outside the box things we can say that would add to the farmer's ability to farm the land. What the other uses, whether it's Artists of Yardley or what we end up doing with the Satterthwaite home or any of the other buildings on there, we have some flexibility how we do things. These are historic buildings. There are some ideas out there, but we're not there yet. And we're not saying that we're going to get rid of any agricultural uses. And I don't want anyone to think that we are. It's the farm is the farm and it will stay the farm, because not for nothing, we have to do that because it's under easement. We signed up for that deal a long time ago.
But yes, and the farm is a collection of those buildings. It was purchased as open space with all of those components. So if you try and separate it, I think you're diminishing the chances for applying for the funds, just like when Pennsylvania purchased these farms, it purchased the house, the farm rights, everything, the development rights, so that no one would come in and develop it, just as it was the purpose of Lower Makefield Township when they purchased in 1999. So
Laura,
that purpose is still there.
Laura, just a quick question. You know what percentage has to remain farm in order to be eligible for those grants?
I do not know.
Okay,
I'm
so
new to this, and
be...
I am familiar with the agricultural security area, and I know that there's still a component, the house and other buildings near the farm, which also act as a natural habitat. There's area that you have to allow to be runoff water. It can't be just purely the farm. So even though the land has a house and an outbuilding, they still can contribute to the overall welfare of the farm as a protected natural area with habitat and water.
Thank you again for your call. We appreciate it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't want to prolong this, but I did send an email to the board. Unfortunately, my copy is not dated, but I did do some research on the conservation easement, specifically under the program in which the easement was conveyed, and the language and scope of agricultural activities recognized and permitted. The deed for the easement refers to as an agricultural area security law, that law, for the authority into which the easement was conveyed. So, that, as to Supervisor Grenier's point, certainly the acreage that's under conservation easement is subject to the agricultural, to be in an agricultural security area. And, to facilitate that, I'm sure the township does not want to do anything to hinder that. In fact, the expansion was done back, I think Supervisor Lewis and I were talking offline, 2017, when that was expanded. So that was all part of that, certainly the intent then, and to deviate from that. And I certainly have heard nothing from any board member tonight that there's any indication or any intent to deviate from that. In fact, I don't want to steal Mr. Camerata's thunder, but adaptive reuse doesn't mean different use. It may mean reuse of the property, maybe enhance it for that purpose. So again, I don't want to steal the thunder of the Historical Commission, although a long time ago I was a history major. But anyway, I do think that's, to answer the caller's questions, I think that really is still within the concept of whatever he's discussing tonight.
Thanks, Kurt. Did you want to add something?
No, Dan answered the point I was going to make. I just want to add one thing because we've gotten a call or two. If you read the ad hoc committee report, you will see that Dennis, who chaired that process, looked and spoke very passionately about the reuse, particularly of the barns and other buildings on there to serve the farming function, which he deemed vitally important, which is certainly the basis for the RFP that you're going to be putting out, and even the steering committee that produced that report. So I think recognize that.
Sorry, Kurt, but to be clear, it is literally the first line of the executive summary and then the report. So
yes. And Dennis, to his credit, spent a lot of time with the family that does the farming. He wasn't just writing in an abstract way. He asked what their needs were. They were looking at everything from talking about having a longer lease to be able to invest more into the land and how to use the property. So certainly that's going to be a strong basis of any further formal evaluation.
Thank you again. Is there any other public comment?
No more public comment.
All right, hearing none, I call it a question. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Motion carries 5-0. So we are moving now to.
James, can I make my follow-up motion on the
Oh, yeah,
dendrochronology?
sure, yep,
So-
absolutely.
Let's, Mr. Truelove, if you have any suggestions in rewording this, please let me know. But I'd like to make,
Again, before you make it, I know
Sure.
you did clarify process earlier because this is not, it's proceeds budgeted, blah, blah, but does it have to be advertised? Right, if we're about to spend money, does it have to be advertised under the new sunshine?
Possibly, and you may want to consider doing that the next meeting, if you want, and have at least discuss the concept of doing that, to make it so there's no objection. That might be the way to do it. I don't want to say it has to be, but it's
That
probably.
meeting, that meeting is scheduled for June 9th.
9th, yeah, next Thursday, yeah.
could I make a motion to have our township manager reach out to a dendrochronology provider to have a quote ready for the next meeting?
Technically, no, if that's spending money, but Kurt, please, and sorry, James.
I will say it is,
No, that's-
dendrochronology is included in phase 1 in the master plan as I'm reading the report. So I'm wondering if we could technically slide it in under what Fred.
Well,
went through.
Dan, let's be honest. So let's have as far as dollar amounts go, I can reach out and do things without a motion per my administrative, as long as the amounts are administratively approved. I'm not going to approve it. Obviously you all will, but to me to go out and get quotes, if everyone nods, that's not a motion. I could just do that on my
You
own.
do it by consensus.
Just pick that up, then.
Do I have consensus of the board to have Kurt go out and get some quotes for such? Looks like, yes.
I'm nodding.
4 nods and John. yes.
However, let me just add a little color. If at a meeting of the ad hoc committee, forgive me, I don't remember, but a member of Patterson Farm Preservation spoke at the ad hoc committee and inferred, didn't commit, but inferred that that group would pay for the dendrochronological study. So I think it would be good for staff to not only think about getting quotes, but reaching out to the PFP to see if we can get a commitment on that comment.
So I guess the consensus of the board is to have 2 options, either an outside person or if we can get, well, we're going to need somebody from the outside to come do this anyway, but it's whether or not we're going to spend the money or if based on some prior comments, if someone else is willing to pay for that study.
So how about I look into all of those things and we'll have the target date of the 9th to be able to show
Perfect.
whatever we've been able to put together.
Works for me. Everybody happy with that? Excellent. All right.
James,
Yes.
I'm sorry, real quick. So I figured I had an hour for this meeting and we're running long, but I have family here and I'm going to have
Yes.
to go. So if I'm needed for anything, I'll have that assignment.
Yep.
And I may text you for specifics to make sure that the quote that I'm getting is encompassing, right, everything that you're talking about. So I may reach out to you for that. Okay.
And before you just actually probably best to talk to Mr. Majewski because I think he's actually met with the people that would do the study.
Okay.
So he probably knows even more than I do.
I know where his office is. So
Yes, you do.
okay.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good.
Have a
Have a
good
good
evening.
night.
Yeah.
Good night, Kurt.
Night.
He's going to seek.
Kurt now is not with us for number 5, which is the discussion and consideration of the formation of a trust. And the 2 options that we're looking at from a board standpoint is a irrevocable or an accessible. So I had some interesting thoughts about this today. And now that I'm looking at those 2 words, I guess it has to be one or the other. There's no flex on this. An accessible trust. And Dave, this is the only question that I had about an irrevocable trust would be if 30 years from now, we're in a situation where the township is in dire financial straits, right? If this trust is irrevocable, it's exactly that, right? It cannot be changed. So, but if 30 years from now, the township is in dire straits and the board, a unanimous vote by the Board of Supervisors alongside a referendum during an election year would allow the the funds to be tapped into for an emergency situation, no matter what it is, I mean, that still just makes it an accessible trust, correct?
Well, I was thinking about this today as well. In the municipal context, there really is no true irrevocable trust, and I'll start explaining it as quickly and as simply as I can. I discussed in our prior memorandum about the different means to establish a trust. Resolution is one that's obviously the easiest to undo because you just need another resolution at a subsequent meeting. Second would be an ordinance. And that's, it's legislation, has to be advertised, and there's public comment, things like that that would be involved. Same thing with rescinding the ordinance, you'd have to go through the same process. The other way, which is I think the one that was least attractive to everybody, but one is probably the most, I guess, for lack of a better term, ironclad, would be the authority creation. In other words, you create an authority to oversee the trust and things like that. But as we know, authorities can also be dissolved by the curator. So in those circumstances, there really is no absolute way that the trust would be irrevocable in the sense that we know it in the estate planning way. Now, having said that, I know that you can make it, if you do it, say by ordinance, you have specific terms. You can have terms in that. In fact, Middletowns does this as well, where you talk about circumstances where you can declare an economic emergency or something like that. So there may be circumstances you have to be very specific how you lay those out, where an economic emergency would allow for some invasion of the corpus or the body of the trust, literally. And whether you want to do it just by the supervisors at that time having the authority to do it, or as they indicate in Middletown, again, I'm not saying everything they did in Middletown was exactly the way you want to do it, but there is a method to do so, that they have a referendum approach as well. So there are ways to do that. The devil's in the details, but hopefully all that makes sense to everybody. But
Sure.
I think you want to make sure,
Could it be a combination of those two things, whether it be a unanimous or a unanimous vote by the Board of Supervisors as well as a referendum?
that could be, you'd have to, I would think, again, thinking off the top of my head, you'd have to have at least the majority of the board authorize the referendum before you would do it. That's the way I would see it. And then it's, again, I don't want to go too far afield, but it's almost like amending the Constitution of the United States. You have to have the Congress decide it in one level at a certain percentage that's required, and then the states would have to ratify it at a certain level as well. So, those things can be baked into the recipe, so to speak.
So I guess just for clarification of verbiage, the irrevocable truly isn't an irrevocable. However, we can put some checks and balances in there in place to say, you need a unanimous or a supermajority of the vote, as well as a possible referendum at a voter level in order to release funds. And there also has to be some things that would trigger that, whether it's an economic reason. I think that would probably be the only reason. Obviously, would be an economic reason. I think that the second part of that being the accessible trust is something that was floated around as far as us becoming our own bank, essentially, where that money would be there for us to borrow from at a certain rate, and then we would repay ourselves. So I think that that's really what we're deciding on tonight.
Right.
There is no true irrevocable. We just have to put some stipulations about how it becomes revocable down the road. Okay. So now I will open it up to supervisor comments after I've made that clarification. Dr. Weiss, did you want to add something?
Well, you're correct in that no trust is forever. The trustees can always dissolve the trust for whatever reason. They're allowed to dissolve the trust, whether it be supervisors or trustees that are independent from the trust instrument itself. That being said, we can make it very difficult for future boards or trustees to dissolve the trust. We can set very strict standards. And as far as an accessible trust, I would not support something like that, because in borrowing from the trust would basically mean tax increases for the community, which would basically negate the reason for a trust. So, if we're going to do it, if we're going to do a irrevoke, a non-accessible trust, I would just think that we would set up standards that would make it very difficult to remove the corpus of the trust.
And just for the record, out of those options that Dave talked about, you would lean more towards a unanimous board, maybe with a referendum, or would you a trust, like an actual trust committee?
Well, if we're going to talk about the makeup of trustees or how that's going to be done, I think we can do that with more time to deliberate. But whether we set up trustees and a majority of the trustees and the supervisors, if they're two different, different bodies, would be good, or a vote of referendum would be appropriate as well, because we're talking hopefully a significant amount of money, which would be used to fund the township for whatever reason this board sees fit, and go from there. So there's if you, my colleagues, want to discuss that further now, I'm willing to spend the time. But as far as for this deliberation and consideration, I think the type of trust would be just figuring out which type of trust we want, whether it's accessible or irrevocable, would be appropriate according to the agenda. But I'm willing to expand.
Okay.
If I could just interject really quickly, I think Supervisor Weiss kind of hit on it. I think the choices really are accessible or non-accessible, because if we say irrevocable by law, as I described earlier, I don't think there really truly is a way to accomplish that under the circumstances I described.
So I guess it should be really like accessible or readily accessible are the two options, right?
Or accessible or non-accessible, I think. Or
Non-accessible.
limited accessibility.
Limited or okay, stipulated accessibility. Okay. Supervisor Blundy, I believe you had your hand up.
I'm not going to get involved. Nope, never mind. Go ahead, Dan.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, Supervisor McCartney and I had a lengthy conversation about this earlier today, trying to not game plan, but trying to see worst case scenario, what we would be in different circumstances. So, my thought, I would love to protect the principal, as much of the principal for as long as possible, and let the whatever interest we get feed back into our annual budget as another revenue source for our budget. How we do that, we also, in addition to how we set it up, we also have to see what we would invest in, what our options are, to see what that would be. I don't know how strongly I feel about either. At this point, I can be convinced either way, I think, about the accessible versus non-accessible. I think there may be, I don't want us to be able to just, or any other future board, to just say, hey, we're going to go spend $20 million on this one project and be done with it, and there goes our principal. I don't want that to ever be an option. That would be the nuclear option in terms of something, James, to your point earlier about something really bad happening that we have to get there. But I don't want it to just be, hey, we got this $2 million project, this $5 million project. Hey, why don't we go buy another golf course and spend double than what we should have? We just don't want it to be available for something like that. So I'm open to ideas. I don't know if we need our township manager, solicitor, whoever else, to kind of, based on what we talk about tonight, start to give us a couple different options for a structure for us to spin in our heads. But I'm open to directing to some sort of motion to directing them to do that after we have a little bit of conversation as to what we might want them to do. But I think generally questions James was asking, I'd ask the same ones, and Fred, the comments you were making, I'm right there with you. But I'm curious about devil's in the details with this one. So I'm just curious about other supervisors' opinions and ideas.
Yes, Dr. Weiss.
No, I totally understand, Dan, on that. That's why I hesitate to talk about specifics at this point, because there are so many options we can do. Just for example, we can have the board of supervisors serve ex officio as trustees of the trust. We can add extra members as trustees. We can have separate trustees, not an authority. As our solicitor said, we could have an authority to independently manage I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can consider, and I have no real, preference on how to go. However, what I do feel strongly about is protecting the money, and protecting it for as long as possible. And if the trust ever needed to be dissolved, it would have to be for one heck of a good reason to dissolve the trust or even spend any part of the principal. That we're restricted in investments so that there is no capital gain. There's only interest or dividends. So there's no point in talking about withdrawing capital gain from these funds. It's all income. So I think the discussion would be whether we have an accessible trust or a non-accessible trust, and then have more meetings, and this could be even considered an executive session on the best types of instruments to manage the money, which could between now and the end of the year, we could decide, once we figure out what kind of a trust we want.
Thank you. Supervisor Lewis, did you want to add anything?
Sure. In general, I would support very, very limited accessibility to the monies. And in general, I have concerns that we have limited investment options. Second-class township doesn't give us much. And given what happened in March in terms of significant inflationary pressures, we're going to have a situation where the principal is going to be of less value over time. And so as a consequence, I'd want to make sure that whatever investment strategy we have, that we're not, I'm more than just invading the principal. I want to make sure that it has real value over time. Because even if we're invested in very, very safe investments, we could end up losing real value over time. And I'm wondering if, we'd have the option of the Treasury index bonds, which are,
Treasury bonds are part of that.
Dave.
Yeah, Treasury bonds are part of that. I'm not sure whether those specific types are, but obviously we could look into that. I mean, Kurt may know about that too.
And that would be to protect the principal long run. And as far as accessibility, my only option, or my suggestions around accessibility would only be in cases where the fund would be restored to its prior value in a very limited period of time. So if you said, hey, I want to borrow against the fund and buy it back, with interest that would exceed what they would be getting as an investment, that would be an option, in terms of protecting the overall real value of the fund. But that's generally where I'm at with this. It's not that large a sum of money for thinking of 50 years. And I'm not sure that it's going to spin off all that much money after inflation for our general fund.
Thanks, John. Any other comments? Yes, Fred.
Well, I understand what Supervisor Lewis is trying to say, but in an inflationary cycle like we're in now, if we laddered CDs, the Treasury notes, we're averaging from 5 years to 1 year certificates or notes. We're looking at an average of 2.5%. So if we put $10 million just for exhibition purposes only, we're looking at $250,000 added to our general fund at the end of the year. So, which is not insignificant. I would strongly urge the board not to make this accessible for any reason whatsoever. If there's a disaster and we were looking at an Act 47 insolvency one day, that would be something that trustees would consider to dissolve the trust, to pay for the viability of the township. But something less than that, I would be really pressed to dissolve the trust or even borrow from the trust.
For my fellow supervisors, if you want to see some examples of investment options for townships, there is I believe Mr. Trulove knows a fair amount about this. There's what's called Pliget, the Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust, is a common option that townships use in this scenario, where it talks about different investment options, CD laddering, et cetera, that Fred was talking about. There's a couple others that are similar, but that would, I think, PSDLAF, I forget another long acronym, Pennsylvania. I think that's related to schools and local governments as well. So
the second was with schools. Yeah, you're correct. The first one though is a well-known entity.
So and I'm not suggesting we use them per se, but it's an available resource for us to look at to see if some scenarios we might be able to leverage that as an option or something similar.
But these are all investment options that we would figure out once we decide on what kind of trust we want. Definitely.
I was going to say,
and
I'm sorry,
sorry,
go ahead,
Dave.
Dan. No, go ahead.
And all I'd say is part of informing our how we set it, not necessarily how we set it up, because I think that we would do that anyway, but in terms of what it can be used for and what it might mean to us, it would be nice to have a few scenarios provided in terms of, Fred, to use your $10 million example, if we following the second class township code, use Pliget following our investment options, we anticipate it would kick off this much per year. If we did 15 or 20, whatever it is, I'm making up numbers because they're easier math, to see what that would mean to our budget on an annual basis and how long that would go for. I think that would be helpful. Yeah. I know Kirk's not here, but I'm sure that's something he could do on a napkin pretty quickly.
Thanks, Dan. Any other comments?
I was just going to say, I think there is seems to be some broad consensus on limited accessibility or very limited. The concern I have on investment options is not all that appealing. And even if we're earning 5 on a laddered CD, we're now at an annual inflation about 7.2 or something like that. That being said, I do want to say I have great respect for our Federal Reserve Chair. And I'm very hopeful that the efforts that he and the Federal Reserve Board are doing will help bring inflation down quickly. And we won't be in this, it'll be a temporary concern, not a long run one.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, I mean, at this point, I think what I'm looking for is for a motion. If somebody wants to make a motion one way or another, whether it's to move forward with an irrevocable or an accessible trust, I think that's basically what I'm looking for at this point.
I make a motion to form a trust that is irrevocable / highly non-accessible, as I'm a little bit confused by what wording I need to use at this moment in time. But the gist is that it would be protected and we would build in strengths as to what would take in order to touch the corpus of it.
I'll second.
Motion made by Supervisor Blondie, seconded by Supervisor Weiss. Any discussion? Yes, Dan.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. What my thinking process is, since if we're going to have another meeting, what I would like to do is maybe have this as since we're talking about phases tonight on other things, talking about sort of a 2-part process where maybe this meeting we direct. This is my thought process. Disagree with me if you like. I understand. We direct our manager and/or solicitor to kind of frame that for us, a couple different options for us, and then next meeting we vote on whatever one we like best.
I think that the black and white of this issue is irrevocable versus accessible, correct? So I think the devil, like you said before, I think the devil, the details is, if we're going to agree to an irrevocable trust, what stipulations specifically are we going to put in there as we move forward, what triggers are we saying,
Right.
how is it that it can become accessible under a limited scope? I believe that that's what's the issue on the table tonight. I don't think specifically, and I get it. I want to know specifically what's going to make those triggers happen and how we work those out.
Yeah. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I'm just wondering if we get a couple options, and then if we say vote on it as Suzanne, as your motion is tonight, and then we have another vote at some point on the details, I could get on board with that. I just want to make sure we have options on details in a future meeting.
Well, to be clear, as I understand it, which doesn't mean I'm correct, right? The options would be, what do those barriers or guardrails look like? We would be moving forward with I'm hesitating, irrevocable / highly not accessible fund. And then the specifics of how that protection is laid out would be what would be up for discussion at a later date.
Okay.
That's how I understand it.
Any other comments? Any public comment?
I have one public comment online.
Thank you. If you could bring them in.
Fred's in the room with us now.
Thank you. Fred, if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Fred Childs, 1345 Lexington Drive, Lower Makefield.
And your comment, Fred?
Well, aside from the technicality that you're going through right now, I just wanted to make a couple comments. And first off, just express congratulations and appreciation to this board for all you've accomplished over the past few years in securing the township's financial stability and continuing to look into ways to innovate and improve cost efficiency. And especially also thanks to Kurt, Managers Ferguson, for all of his efforts over the last few years. So unfortunately, he's not there now, but just want to extend best wishes to him as he moves on. But again, aside from the technicalities that you're talking about, and I appreciate the fact that you're looking to establish a quote unquote reserve fund or lock some of this, at least some portion of this proceeds away for a number of years. That's an important, focus and would be helpful as the township faces any future financial issues or emergencies and or other capital replacement programs. But I'm not sure, it's not clear to me, certainly, and probably not to the rest of the township, whether you're talking about the entire amount that has been received from the proceeds, or if it's some portion of that. And I think that should be clarified for all of us. And the other point is just to emphasize that, again, to remind the board, and not that you need reminding, but the reason you have this proceed is because of the sale of the sewer system. And now you've, been able to strengthen the finances of the township and relieved yourselves of the township and the taxpayers of the increasing costs that would be due, as the sewer system deteriorates further and needs expansion and so on. But now that cost, and we've seen obviously recent news about the level of rates that Aqua is proposing and being approved for in other municipalities, and upwards of 50, 60, 75% increases to the ratepayers in those townships. So the concern is that, again, there was discussion overall during the whether or not to sell the sewer, that there was an implication that there would be some amelioration or something that would adjust those ratepayers in the township for the fact that those, after the first 2 years of no increase, that we will be faced and we will solely be responsible for those additional costs and increases that Aqua may charge. So I think it's important that the board realize and consider how, now that the township is receiving, potential increased revenues, and you've eliminated a lot of the debt on the township, that's fine, but the responsibility now falls directly on the individual ratepayers, many of whom are, as I've said before, are retired or on fixed incomes. And so I think it's a concern throughout the community of how, the benefit to the township itself can accrue to those who are going to be faced in a couple of years with potentially extremely increased sewer costs, as well as water and electrical that are always going up. So I just want to emphasize that concern and ask that you give that some consideration, and whether that's in light of the increased revenues that the township may receive through the golf course and potentially eventually the slack house, if that's renovated, and those kinds of things, in terms of whether some adjustment in the tax rate should be considered in lieu of our increased sewer rates and so on. So I think that's basically just what I wanted to emphasize to the board at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. And just for clarification for the first part of your question, I don't believe that there is a consensus of the board of what the amount that is going to be put into this irrevocable fund is going to be. So there's not a dollar amount that has been determined yet, but I do appreciate your comments regarding the sewer.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, because I did want to say there's certainly a number of beneficial and viable projects that, including the Patterson Farm, which could be in, a number of millions of dollars overall, that could be recipients of those proceeds. So thanks.
Thanks again, Fred. Appreciate it. Any other comments?
There's no other public comment.
And there's nobody in the room, John?
No,
Okay.
other than member of the press.
The Honorable Mr. Chris English.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a second by Supervisor Weiss. We've discussed it. I'm going to call to question all those in favor of, let me make sure I'm using the right terminology here, Dave. All those in favor of the formation of an irrevocable trust for the sewer proceeds, please raise your hand and say aye.
Before we make that vote,
It was, I'm sorry, irrevocable and highly not accessible.
Not accessible. Details to be worked out.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Because I'm confused by the April, memo that we have, but.
Yeah. John, did you want to add something?
yeah, I'm generally supportive of the motion. However, I was a little troubled that there was a discussion that we weren't talking about the full proceeds post debt repayments. So that's cautionary for me in that last discussion. So I'd like to.
Did you have an idea of 'cause I wasn't under the impression that anybody had an idea of what they were talking. Were you under the impression that it was the full proceeds of the sewer sale that were going to be going into the irrevocable trust?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that the understanding of the other?
Some of it a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I mean, we just earmarked $300,000
Yeah,
out of it.
that was a decision that was made a few minutes ago, right there after we said that. So my assumption is that all of it should be, I mean, if that's the case, the trust becomes less valuable if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to take X out of it now, right? And then lock the rest of it. I mean, that seems a little bit not in the spirit of what was suggested previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach is a combination of both those things as far as maybe taking, and again, I'm just saying, throwing numbers out there, taking the majority of it or a large majority of it and throwing it into an irrevocable trust. However, if there are proceeds that are available now for infrastructure that we could use.
Yes, but we have a lot of money already that we received as part of COVID relief, as part of the nation's infrastructure bill. So I guess my concern is, my understanding was we intended to protect the proceeds of the sewer. But if that's the case, I guess I have a question as what your intent is. How much of it do you intend to protect?
Well, and I think that that's probably what we're going to be working out in the next meeting is how much and what the framework of that's going to be.
But why would we have a framework over a trust if we don't know how much we're protecting?
I don't know that one begets the other, right? I appreciate your point, and I think that is something that has to be determined. But knowing the structure that it's going to be secured in, whether it's $1, and it's going to be a lot more than $1 if I have a say, or if it's the 99% of the proceeds, doesn't really impact the structure that has to be created.
But you could just as easily say that you're going to protect all 100% of it, and some portion of it can be, accessed at a future time. Because I guess I have a hard issue here with the suggestion that, oh, well, we're saying we're protecting all of it, but we haven't decided how much we're protecting, and we're going to figure out that later. To me, that's
nobody said we were protecting all of it.
Just for clarification, John, I've never said we're protecting all of it.
Well, how much do you wish to protect?
And
yeah, sure. Go ahead, Fred.
in this whole process, from the day we started this journey to today,
Right.
it was decided that if we were going to sell the sewers, which we already did, that there was 3 major issues that we wanted to solve. One is getting out of debt. 2, repair infrastructure, remaining infrastructure. And 3, create a fund that would ease up either rates or the tax burden to the residents. We fulfilled, I think, the first one. We're dealing with 2 and 3. We have to, if we protect all of the remaining funds, we can't fix our infrastructure without going into debt or raising taxes, which would change the whole reason why we're having this discussion in the first place. So at this point, I would call the question, and we already know what's going on. We've heard from the public. We've heard from the supervisors. It's time now to just go forward, create this trust if the board so desires, and then move on to the next topic.
And again, the only reason that I'm opening this discussion piece of it is because I think there was a little bit of confusion by Supervisor Lewis that he thought it was all going to be put into this trust.
I understand, but
yeah,
from my statements, and unfortunately, James, this happened, before you were even the supervisor. This is a continuation of a long journey. The logical next step, since we've basically gotten out of debt for all intents and purposes. Now it's time to fix our infrastructure and protect taxpayers, to protect the residents of this town as best we can. So I think the motion was made. Second, we had the discussion. If the board decides to negate infrastructure improvements over protecting the funds, that's within the purview of the board. But right now, I think we need to create this trust and then deal with
Supervisor Weiss, what do you define as infrastructure?
Paving roads, our storm sewers, water management, stormwater management, community amenities, ball fields, parks, more open space, quality of life issues. There's a whole bunch of things that you can put in that list of infrastructure, making Lower Makefield a better place to be.
How much of that proceeds are you anticipating would be part of infrastructure spending? It's 22 million, I believe.
I believe you
Yeah.
called the question.
I believe I called the question. Ms. Blondie, Supervisor Blondie, would you second that and we can get
Yes.
forward? Okay, so
Oh, okay, well,
that's the end of the discussion.
pardon?
Until
That's
another
the end of
night.
the discussion.
Yeah,
Unless
I
you
think
want-
I think we'll cross that bridge when we get there, John. I think the point is, do you want an irrevocable or an accessible trust, regardless of the amount?
Well, we're going to vote on that.
Well, it honestly depends on how much you intend to protect.
And
So
vote against
point of order.
Sure.
I made a motion to call the question.
Sure.
It was seconded.
Oh, yeah, go, hey,
We need to actually
Supervisor Weiss,
now,
you're welcome to shout me down, no problem, you'll get the vote.
no, we actually need
Chill,
to,
chill,
we need to vote on the motion.
Relax.
Thank
You
you.
can take
Hey,
12
Mike.
minutes and berate me another day. You'll get home.
This has
Don't
nothing
worry,
to do with
chill.
you. It has to do with process.
Chill. Relax. Relax.
There is no discussion except on the motion.
Pardon.
The motion is to call the question.
So I called the question. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 I
Opposed?
I don't know what I'm voting on here because we don't know what we're protecting. So I guess until I get a sense of that, I got to be a no.
Okay. So for the record, the motion passed 4-1 with Supervisor Lewis objecting to forming an irrevocable trust with the sum of or whatever the sewer funds, whatever amount is of the sewer funds at a date to be determined later, or an amount to be determined at the next meeting. I think that's what we're going to be discussing at the next meeting. So,
James, for the next meeting, without getting into a long discussion, because I think we're gonna probably have a really long meeting tomorrow night too.
yeah, I will have very specific items on
Jesus.
that next meeting for you, as far as what the details that you've been asking, for sure.
So are we, Supervisor Weiss listed a bunch of items that could be included in infrastructure. Are you anticipating next meeting to have a list of, I'll say a wish list, or a list of items that we can discuss putting all or some portion of the proceeds in this trust, or whatever we're calling it, and then a wish list of projects that it sounds like it's coming down the pike, which I'm getting very uncomfortable with all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Is that what you're anticipating having? So do we anticipate having residents come in and ask us to fund their projects next meeting? Is that?
I wouldn't anticipate that, but I also can't control that. I mean, obviously, when you're in a situation where, there is a pot of money, and there's projects to be done, people are going to ask for them to be done, right?
Sorry, I'll ask it a different way. Are you anticipating putting any specific projects on the agenda for discussion?
I think the infrastructure and I think the from my perspective, infrastructure has been a huge part of it. So whether that's, and we talked about it earlier, stormwater management, culverts, road paving, parks and recs projects. Yeah, I think all those things are on the table. I don't think anything's off the table.
Okay. And then we still have, again, for next meeting, we still have a lot of federal dollars available specific to infrastructure. So that could probably offset some of our goals for certain infrastructure projects. And there are other means to pay for that are not taxes that we can discuss at next meeting, as James.
Yeah, I will make sure that Mr. Ferguson is fully available for the meeting to make sure that, we can get those questions answered. But yeah, I'm right there with you on that.
Okay. I just know what to
Do you
anticipate.
have an
that's all.
anticipated amount that you view as infrastructure here?
No.
No. Okay. So
But we have more than sewer proceeds to consider. We have $1.7 million of relief money yet to be spent, and we have $3.5 million, give or take a couple of dollars from the bond fund. So, we're looking at a potential $25 to $27 million that we can use for whatever reason, all of which is open to discussion at this point.
So I guess my question is, how much do you want to spend? What projects do you want? Why wouldn't you have thought of that before you want to create the trust? I mean, if we have a trust and you come out and you spend 20 million.
I always feel like you're trying to, that's what we're supposed to all be discussing. Now, tomorrow, you call me, I call you.
Yeah.
This meeting.
John, do you have any projects that you'd like discussed? What projects would you like to see the money go towards? Why don't you think about that for the next meeting, and then you can bring
Do you
those.
really want that discussion?
Sure. Yeah, why
Okay.
wouldn't I?
I've been, I think, probably the most aggressive advocate for road paving ever.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I've been out in front on that for a while. We've been pretty on other infrastructure and the culvert stuff. I think as it relates to stormwater, there's a larger strategy that we need to think about and how we address that over the long haul in discussions with staff around that. I don't have a dollar amount or project figure on that. I guess my concern is I don't want a situation where we're trying to push too many projects through too quickly. We've actually been relatively poor in implementing the projects that have been pre-approved and were funded multiple times over, whether we're receiving state grants on projects that we haven't executed on.
Who's
And I think we owe the taxpayers,
Who's we?
all of us.
Like what?
Go through and we'll talk about all the ones that are state funded that took us much, that are still not complete. Think about the path around the Kiola Fields and Oxford Valley Road. That project's been out there for a long time. The projects that we've executed in the last.
Not from this board, not from the
because-
township. That's money that the state hasn't given us yet. We've
No, we
done
didn't
everything that
execute the
we were
project
asked.
first. We have to execute the project first. We have to get the
You're talking
bids
about
out.
the
We're just
community
getting
stuff.
that.
You want to talk about the
And we have the
community?
same issue on, quite frankly, the only projects we've executed, right, are the ones to make the sewer system in such clean shape that Aqua is getting an amazingly great wastewater, wastewater conveyance system. All of those projects are completed. Those are the ones we've made the investments on over the last couple of years. Those haven't been investments in other infrastructure that we were looking for. So
And that's
that's
what
what the priority was.
Since we've had the money, I mean, we've quadrupled our road paving program. We've
And we-
already addressed our residents at Mapleville area with relief money. We've improved the community center. We've righted the dog park. We've dealt with Sandy Run. We've dealt with Makefield Road. We've dealt with the signal lights at
Mayfield-
Lindenhurst.
Which one on Makefield Road?
We've removed the negative outlook from Moody's, and hopefully this year we will upgrade to where we were before we ended up in near insolvency. But you're right. There's a lot more to be done, Supervisor Lewis, and I think every member of this board is willing to move forward to make sure that our township continues to get stronger, and that not only that our sewer rates that increases over the next 10 years be lower than they would have been had we stayed in the sewer business, but we continue to go on a very strong path. And I appreciate
Supervisor
you
Weiss,
bringing that up.
actually, I really held my tongue when a member of the community expressed their pain over pending sewer increases.
Yeah,
You
well,
know the
as
township
we know,
manager-
as we
pardon
know,
me?
as
As
we
you know, the
that
township manager,
as
actually,
the
when he
township
told us
manager
this
actually
plan-
said that the rates would be lower with Aqua than if we stayed and kept
pardon
our
me,
system.
the
the
township
economy of
manager,
scale.
when he requested a rate increase and told you the projects that he wanted executed, warranted
That we
to
were
the board at
required
that time,
to- under the plan we
That
entered
DEP
into with
required
the
us to
that we
do.
did in fact
if we were
execute, would
continuing to-
therefore
to-
be,
to- that's
rates
not
would be
true,
steady for 7
Supervisor
years.
Lewis.
And you had options where you could have sold the sewer system to other participants with a 10-year guarantee of no rate increase.
All
That
right.
is
That's
not
Not
true.
take the
Part of
best
their
bid.
negotiation
So
That-
I
to
guess
sell
my,
Aqua
where I'm
today.
having a hard problem, real trouble here is it was a really bad decision to sell the sewer system.
Your problem
I'm
is
continuing to
your
be correct
problem
about
is,
that.
Supervisor Lewis, that
Huh?
your attempt to rewrite reality into something that is not true continues to amaze me and most of the other members of this board.
Well,
So-
I'm glad
so-
you feel
so-
that way, but do you want me to show you the emails I received from residents who tell
Well,
me
let's
that I made the right call?
Let's just look at since we have nothing else to do except adjourn the meeting. Let's just look at the actual results of the indicated rates that Aqua gave us versus what we would have had to pay had we stayed in the business. So
And if you did
and
that,
let's
our indicated
Can I make a
rates-
motion to
modified-
adjourn?
yeah, I'll take that.
Second,
There you go.
Let's call the question.
Call to question. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 That's not directed at any supervisors. That's so the public can go home.